Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, listeners. This is the Dark Matters radio show with the Sorceress Cagliastro. I am the Sorceress Cagliastro, blood sorceress, necromancer in the hands of nine, and I am honored to have the opportunity to share this information on a weekly basis with individuals who are like-minded or who are questioning, who have interest in the areas of blood sorcery and necromancy, dealing with the disincarnate, the experience of working with demons, and all manner of things that may or may not be in your usual loop. I am grateful to have Morgan St. Knight in the group now producing the show and offering us a segment about the science of sorcery. Welcome, Morgan.
Thank you, Sorceress. It's a pleasure to be here.
And my co-host, the one and only Chris Ostrowski, who I had the enormous benefits of meeting about a year ago, and he laughs, but he does not know that I would not go back on the air with this show until I had the right co-host, and he is the one. We've had many opportunities to talk, and one day I said, you know what, the stories are too important. Your history is too important. You have to talk about it on the air. So welcome, Chris.
Welcome to you, too, and I don't know what to say to that. You make me blush.
Well, I'm sure others have tried, so I feel privileged to have accomplished that. And on the air tonight with us is Victor, the voice Furman. Victor and I have known each other for a year or two. We've talked about a lot of important things, and I'm grateful to have Victor here because Victor brings a sense of wisdom and strength to this experience, coming from a different perspective and having had an enormous amount of experience in the human struggle, the human participation with both joyous events and the events of transitioning. Welcome, Victor.
Thank you, Sorceress. I think it really, I don't know about experience or wisdom. I think it's age.
Come on, Victor. We both know a lot of people up there in age who don't have anything to say.
This is true.
So tonight we are going to continue a discussion about containment, which we gave a 30-minute shot to last week as we got this group together and got to know each other on the air. And briefly, containment is a situation or an experience in which one takes either a demon or, let's just broaden the gaze on that and say an energy of some kind, an energy of an event or an energy of a particular strength, and contains it inside of something, inside of an object, for one's own use and experience, and for one's further movement going forward to either protect themselves from that entity or to utilize the energy of that entity in a powerful way. Last week a question was asked about the boxes and can we do containment in the boxes, and we're going to go back and talk about that as well because that is not a physical box so much as a box that we create in one of the four pillars of the science of sorcery. So tonight I just want to talk for a moment. I want to open the floor with a discussion about Tanis. Tanis is a doll that I have, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk about her tonight, but I sat with her for a little while today, and she felt it was okay for me to do so. Tanis is a doll that came to me a number of years ago under a kind of average circumstance. She was a doll online with a number of other dolls very much like her. And when she arrived and I took her out of the box, I heard something say, "Take these colors off of me." And when I did that and I redressed her in a garment that I made for her, it was clear that there was more in there than a rubber doll. I worked with her, and what she was really was a portal, not so much an entity, but a portal. And together we decided what kind of an entity should be in her and what she could do. And after having Tanis for a number of months, she seemed to always be in trouble. dogs would try and tear her apart, and she'd always fall off things, and there'd always be injuries and damage to her that never seemed to stop. So after a year of that, I put in her the most complicated and harsh demon I could find, who is here to protect her and to share a broader gaze with me. Now, people who've seen Tanis have seen her move. They've seen her eyes blink. They've seen her skin change color. They've seen her lips go a little more or less pouty. And she makes a very clear statement. So tonight I want to talk about all kinds of containment, but one in particular is I would like to discuss at some point in the show, and we don't have to start with it, the idea of dolls, using dolls, effigy dolls, demon dolls, whatever you want to call them, and putting things inside them. And tonight also I'd like to be able to talk about how various cultures produce the experience of containment, because all cultures do it, pretty much all cultures, one way or the other. And amongst us, we have many, many stories and experiences, given that we all come from different backgrounds, and we can share that on the air. So, Chris, do you want to open up a little bit of this conversation regarding containment and some of your thoughts about that and your experiences?
Sure. It's funny that you said about objects and how they get put to use. It's a good in what I do. It's an understanding that if you find something laying on the ground, it's a good idea not to pick it up because you don't know what it was used for. Especially where it depends on where it's located. If you're walking through the woods and it's something like out of place that you wouldn't normally find, like you find tree branches, leaves, things like that in the woods. But it's like if you're walking through and you find a doll or money or something like that, it's a good idea just to leave that stuff alone, because there's a lot of people that take demons and things like that, and they put them into those objects and relocate them to places like the woods or to a safer place. Some of the other things that we used to use, or that we still use, if we're trying to contain a demon or a spirit, is an egg. You'll hear a lot about it's a bad omen to crack an egg and find a bloody egg inside. Well, sometimes there's a reason that that's bloody.
Chris, this is fascinating to me because as a Sicilian person, that egg with blood in it has a whole other meaning. It isn't so much a bad omen as a very clear statement that the woman who has found the egg is either, and it's always interesting to me that it's either being cheating on her husband or is pregnant. Oh, of course, both of those things could be happening at the same time. So in our room full of Sicilian women, somebody cracks a red egg, we call it a red egg, everybody just moves back and shakes their head. And it is a powerful moment when that happens. You were saying about things that you find on the ground and about not touching them. I find that very interesting.
Yeah, like if you're going through, say you're going through the woods and for some reason you would find, say, a railroad spike. I mean, because iron's a good object to use to transfer energy. Why would it be there in the first place? You know what I mean? It doesn't belong there. It's something out of place. So it'd be a good idea just to leave that alone.
Anybody crazy enough to pick up a railroad spike that is not on a railroad, I recommend that they at least try and undo their last 100 steps, because that is a particular item that crosses many cultures and is used for many things. I mean, I know specifically that I've used the railroad spikes for what is called it's sort of a burial, a sudden burial, which is to knock somebody down, knock them out, make them stop, put them in the ground in that way. And of course, I could go further, but that chunk of iron is best used for that, and in many cultures and in many paths, not just this one.
And we all know about a black chicken.
Yeah,
you would have to find, find chicken bones out in the good thing. Just leave them alone, because you don't know what that was.
Yeah, it's true. The idea that everything is so spiffy clean and put away when it's done is an interesting one. It surprises me when people call me and say, I found the head of an animal on my porch. Do you think another animal left it there? Yes, I think another animal left it there. I think it was Australopithecus. What is it? Homo sapiens, sapiens, sapien. Is that what we are? Homo sapsa. I think that's what left it there. Another one just like us, and I think you should put it back and consider moving. Victor, you have any thoughts on this subject?
That's funny. I wouldn't pick up any iron that I find or steal in the street. Leave it for the scrap people to deal with. Just because of the fact you pick up some musty iron, you cut yourself, you could get a very, very nasty infection. That being said, in my practice, in my path, I haven't had a lot of direct experience with containment, other than a couple of things. In my healing practice, I have a healing box, and when I work on someone or work on a group of people, I seal the healing work into this healing box, and the energy contained therein is running constantly. It's just something that keeps recycling itself and sending things out to the people who have requested healing from me. And so that's one form of energy, not so much containment as concentration, focal point, and retransmission. I did have one very interesting experience. I believe all of us have seen some of these paranormal shows, and I cough before I say that because some of them are ridiculous and most of them are ridiculous. And you've seen the ones with the so-called haunted antiques where people buy something. I remember one show, I'm not going to mention the name of the show because it's a disgrace, where this couple bought an antique piano, and immediately they were told by this paranormal team that this piano was possessed or contained the spirit of some type of very nasty entity. And so what they did, it was a beautiful piano. They brought it out into the yard in front of the house, proceeded to take axes and smash it up, and then burned it, which I think is absolutely, that's just horrible. It was a beautiful piano, and I don't believe there was anything connected with it. That being said, we had one of the paranormal teams that I'm a member of had an experience where a couple with a daughter had purchased an antique piano, and when the piano was brought into the house, their daughter started having issues, nightmares, and seeing spirit and so on and so forth. And as it turns out, there was a spirit connected with that specific piano. It was the gentleman who had owned it. He was a composer and a musician in the 1920s, and we were able to help him to move on and relieve this family of the issues that were going on. So that's basically been my experience with attachment to object and containment.
Victor, regarding the healing box, do you ever do you use it to contain the illness ever?
Not per se. Rather than contain illness, what I use it to do is to magnify focus and send out the healing energy. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I've used boxes to contain mental illness that has traveled throughout a family over generations. And the first time that I thought about how to handle this family, there was actually a grandmother, a mother, and her son, 3 generations dealing with a profound diagnosis of various types of mental illnesses. And I don't prescribe to necessarily believing that all things that are unusual are mental illnesses. However, they were well evolved into the loop of believing every bit of the diagnosis. So I worked with them to contain the energy of the illness and had a tremendous success in that area. The grandmother pulled me aside at one point and said, just call it a demon and we'll know what you're doing. And I thought that was very interesting as a Portuguese family, and they seem to have some understanding in their history of what it means to do that. Morgan, tell us what your thoughts are about containment and anything we've talked about already, or do you have some other things you want to add?
Yeah, I do, because I'm trying to focus a lot on the show on the science for the particular subject that we're doing on any given night. And I think when talking about demons, we're essentially talking about beings that are mostly energy. You know, they can have a physical presence. They can certainly manifest for brief periods of time and cause tremendous physical damage. But essentially they are energy. So this is the real question, is how do you contain energy? Because by its nature, it's elusive, it's predisposed to flow, to dissipate, and not be held in one spot. Well, I think one of the best ways we can talk about containing energy in a scientific sense is through the use of magnetic fields. And last week, Victor briefly mentioned the Large Hadron Collider, which is at the CERN facility in Switzerland, and it's a particle collider. And particle colliders use intense magnetic fields to accelerate subatomic particles so that they reach incredible speeds and incredible energies, and they smash them into each other for a variety of experiments. But if we want another example of how magnetic fields can be used to contain vast amounts of energy, all we have to do is look at the sun. If you get any images of the sun taken by NASA, very often what you'll see close to the edge of the sun is a loop-like structure near the edge, which seems to be lighter in color. And what this is a loop of high-energy plasma that's being held in place thousands and thousands of kilometers above the sun. Some of these average about 100,000 kilometers, and that's a little under 8 times the size of the Earth's diameter. And larger prominences can get up to 500,000 kilometers. So if you imagine 40 Earths altogether, you'll have an idea of how large these prominences can get and how much plasma, which is just high-energy gas. It's so high and so intensely energetic that the electrons are actually stripped from the atoms. And this is all soaring above the sun. And it's being held in place by magnetic fields from the sun. Sometimes these fields collapse. And when that happens, this huge cloud of gas goes shooting out into space. And if it happens to shoot in the direction of the Earth, we can have some very nasty effects. If it's a particularly energetic event, what can happen is the arrival of this cloud of highly energetic particles and ionized gas will actually compress the Earth's magnetic field and smush it down closer to the Earth. When that happens, satellites that would normally be protected by the magnetic field will be exposed to the results of this solar plasma hitting the Earth. And that's where you hear when people talk about solar storms and solar flares, where they say, well, this could interrupt cell phone communication or GPS or any other technology that's reliant on satellites. So if you just imagine something this energetic and this powerful, able to cause this much damage, and yet it can be contained by magnetic fields on the sun. So this gives you an idea of just how effective magnetic fields can be in containing energy. And Victor, I know you have some insight in this through your experience with welding. Could you maybe briefly describe what aspects magnetic fields may have as far as plasma containment in that area?
Absolutely. I've been in the welding industry now for the welding supply industry for more than 35 years. And what you find is the development of plasma cutting, what's known as plasma cutting, and also laser cutting, over the last 30 and 40 years. Actually, plasma's been around for maybe 50 or 60 years. And in essence, what a plasma is an electronically charged, high voltage, very hot gas. So you take compressed air or nitrogen and you force it through an orifice into a very tight and fixed space, and you inject it with electricity, and you get 5,000 degrees at a pinpoint. And what they do is they use magnetic fields to contain, magnify, and focus the plasma. And it's also done now with laser cutting in the same way, where the laser is surrounded by a magnetic field which maintains it, focuses it, and directs it. And so these two principles are used for what they call arc constriction, or the plasma arc or the laser arc constriction, making it very fine, very finite, producing a very fine cut, reducing the amount of heat that's injected into the metal that's being cut, and therefore reducing the amount of distortion and the amount of finishing work that has to be done on the metal that was being cut. Sorceress, I believe you had a question there?
Yeah, no, I'm fascinated with this particular thread between you and Morgan. And my question to Morgan was, do you feel that these edges, as you talk about them, are fueling the demonic energy at all on this planet? Because I very strongly do feel that they have something to do, that particular kind of edge, which is what you referred to it as, that the medium of these unusual gases, these high-energy gases, are, as they come closer and closer and closer to the Earth, are fueling the opportunity for demonic energy, allowing them to travel amongst us in a certain way, and allowing them to manifest in a way, giving them form. Because you had made a comment that they are, we made lots of interesting comments about the high-energy gases, but my question was, can they become defined? And Victor, with your work handling these materials, do you think that we are in some way making the case for an easier access amongst human beings for these kinds of energies?
Well, I'll go ahead I'll go jump in with that. I think definitely there is a distinct possibility whenever you have a disturbance in the Earth's electromagnetic field, which can certainly happen when you have these large solar events, it can definitely fuel some of the manifestations that you would get with some of these entities. But I also want to bring in a little bit of a side note in Middle Eastern cultures, and people may wonder why I went off on plasma for so long, but in Middle Eastern cultures there is a group of entities called the jinn, and it's been anglicized as genie, which is how most of us know it in the West. They're somewhat between angels and humans. They have different temperaments. There's a wide variety. Some hate humans and will do anything they can to make humans miserable. Others like humans and will help humans. And then some are totally neutral. They could care less what humans do. But if you need something and you can offer that particular type of jinn something it wants, then it will help you get it. And the reason I bring up the jinn is because they are described in the Quran and in other Middle Eastern sources as being formed of smokeless fire. And sometimes it's translated as essential fire. But these are both very good descriptions of plasma. So if
and solar storms. Solar storms.
Yes. And they don't have any cohesive, if they are real entities, and they can take physical shape so that they can manifest in front of us, but they're really described as being essentially formless, yet somehow they have to contain themselves if they are made of something like plasma or ionized gas or some other ethereal substance. So my suggestion is that perhaps the jinn or these types of entities have learned how to manipulate Earth's magnetic fields so that they can contain themselves to manifest in our world to our sight for brief periods of time, and certainly during times when there's stronger electromagnetic activity and stronger geocurrents flowing because of solar activity, they may be able to tap into that energy and manifest more strongly and then work more strongly within this physical world.
But when they don't have enough energy, you might end up with a slow gin fizz.
See, Victor, you had to pick up there.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. Victor, if we can't keep a sense of humor, then we are no longer qualified to do this work.
That's right.
The sense of what's out there and what's here in terms of energy. Chris and I have talked about this kind of thing, about the planet and the physicality and sort of the terrestrial experience of sorcery. And I have another question for you, Victor. Of course, I have 1,000 questions now because this is a very exciting topic. Chris, when you talk about containment, is it for you the kind of thing where you are taking a physical energy? For example, if there's a demon, and I'm going to talk a lot about demons tonight, and understand that my definition of demon is that they are an amalgam energy that comes from experiences of chaos and constriction and confusion. People who are in a state of panic, this sort of thing. They rise off the suffering of confusion. The energy of those experiences is real and tangible, and we all know as human beings that that's just how it is. You can tell when someone is tense or when someone is angry without, saying, hey, are you upset? And when you see things like a car crash or a plane crash or this kind of thing, and you feel the terror of that kind of experience, we know that this is real and tangible. I won't say facts because that's a word I have an issue with, but real and tangible in the human experience, we can feel these energies. So, Chris, when you are containing something, are you containing it from the point of view of sorcery, where it is the energy of your thoughts, ideas, and intentions that's containing that object, containing that energy into an object, or are you manipulating the energy with your abilities and actually physically putting that object in a container?
I think I kind of do. Well, I think we do all of that because what we're doing, we're using our thoughts, our intentions, and our abilities, but the whole idea of what we're doing is to manipulate something. I mean, we are manipulating the energy around us. I mean, the whole thing that we do just bases that. The idea of sorcery is manipulation. So
right.
What I look at, I'm changing what I'm dealing with. Say it's a demon. I am changing the environment around that demon to contain it.
So what you're saying is that you're encapsulating it like we talked about the iron ring, where you are going over to the demon, you're addressing the demon, and you're saying, I'm wrapping you in a way. And that is more good.
Almost like in its own iron ring.
I see. That makes sense to me.
This is something you're going to be in here for now until I get you someplace where you can be less dangerous.
I see.
That's basically what I'm doing. I would say it's an extension of myself that I'm putting in there. It's like the area that I contain myself in. It's almost like an extension of it.
Sometimes picture John, and those of you who know my work well know that one of the 26 demons in my book, 26 Demons Revisited, is picture John, and he is different than the other 25 in so much as he's a wild card among all wild cards. He will come into my studio. He manipulates bees and hornets. And he will come into my studio if he doesn't like someone, and live bees will drop onto the table in front of them. And I've seen this so many times now. He's very, very difficult to control. And I feel now that he is leaving the group of demons and is making a very strong effort to become an attending demon, the problem being that 9 does not like him. But if you and I were to sit with Picture John, and he can bring with him 2 other significantly ugly demons, by which I mean they are just pure chaos, and you and I would sit together and try to contain one of these demons, I mean, I think that our energy together would be a stronger force, a more just a force to be reckoned with, and that they would feel the difference of 2 people working together to contain. What do you think about that?
Oh, definitely. You can always add to energy. You can always amplify. If there's 2 of us, that's twice as much generation of energy. So we're going to have double the effect.
If we were going to put a demon in an iron ring, and for those of you who are not familiar with the 4 pillars, working the iron ring is one of them. I've developed a system of sorcery that I refer to as a science of sorcery. And one of the pillars of that is working the iron ring. And by doing so, we pretty much clear ourselves, clear the energy away from ourselves, push it out, make it more dense, and have a ring around us, almost more like a capsule than a ring on the floor. It's not that kind of thing. And we work with that sort of thing. But what Chris and I are talking about in terms of containment is building that ring from the outside together. And when I think about working with another sorcerer, and I'm very grateful to Chris who stepped forward and did this show with me because he has amazing energy and strength in this way. And we can physically hold together, put together a ring or put together some kind of non-physical box, by which I mean you cannot pick it up off the shelf, but you can see it and experience its energy. So talking about that, I'm interested in the restructuring of materials, and I know, and I'm sort of jumping around a little bit, but it's a very, very interesting kind of subject. So, Victor, when you talk about welding, when one welds, one takes a solid, makes it a liquid, and allows it to return to a solid. Am I correct about that?
That's correct, yes. It's changing the phase of metal, basically.
So when that happens, is it your opinion that something is released which does not go back in, or that all the elements, all the energy goes back in to cause the re-solidifying of that metal?
Well, in essence, what you're doing is you're melting the surface of a parent metal and then either joining it together by melting it together to another parent metal or adding what's known as a filler metal, which is a comparable metal that will join the two pieces together. So in essence, what you're doing is you're creating either with a flame from a very hot torch, an electric arc from various types of electric arc machines, and you're creating a tremendous amount of heat that will melt the surface of the metal and then allow the metal to fuse together, and then as it cools, it becomes one. So you're putting energy in, and the energy is changing the phase, and as the energy leaves, the phase changes.
I want to talk about a ritual in which that would be extraordinarily helpful. On occasion, I'm asked to contain a demon or a malevolent energy of some sort in a permanent and profound way. I often do this kind of work with demons that I have worked with before and that I know, and to essentially practice the experience of containment, of which I've become quite proficient. But occasionally more than occasionally, I walk into a circumstance where there is a profound possession or on either a house or a person. There is a demon intentionally locked into a situation where nothing good will come out of that for the people involved. And I had this idea that I could melt the demon in a sense that I could create such force of energy within myself that I could touch it and change it into another form and contain it into my hands very tightly and place it in something that will be welded shut or closed shut, having the same experience in the demon that is being had in the metal. And I'm wondering if someone is welding while I am doing this, if I can use the energy that I can hold in my hands and bring the experience of deconstructing that metal and touch the energy of that while someone's welding, and pull that energy onto the demon, deconstruct the demon, drop it into something, and then shut it in and allow the welder to pull away and let the material solidify and lock in a demon this way. This is the kind of stuff that I want to do in the studio with my students in my core group who are elevated to the level of understanding how the work works. What do you think about that?
Well, I tell you what, when I come up to the studio and visit you, I'm going to bring a welding machine with me, and
All
I'll bring
right,
some
then
steel.
Let's do it, and
we'll experiment.
You know, I don't often do video. I don't often film things. And the reason I don't often film things is because when I'm dealing with the disincarnate, their privacy is of utmost importance to me. When I see how the disincarnate are handled in these horrific shows and all that kind of thing, not that they're even really listening, because the people who are calling upon them are just absurd, but that they are insulted in that way, people coming into an asylum where someone might be reliving the loop of their experience, or demons might be, and to be demanded upon to show up like a sideshow act. When I see those kinds of things, I become very frustrated, and I think to myself, I never want to appear to be that sort of thing. And, of course, I could be very rich if I decided to do that, but that's not what I want to do. That being said, I am very interested in finding ways to show how the work works. And this is the science of sorcery. And even the blood sorcery aspect is the science of sorcery. And we'll talk in a little while about what it means to harvest your own blood and how that energy of doing so is really more relevant than the blood itself. So I think that this is something that I'd be very interested in doing with you if you would be interested in doing that with me, and it seems like you are. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that whole story and to maybe something about plasma?
Yeah, just about plasma cutting, the use of plasma cutting machinery. You know, plasma cutting technology, like I said, has probably been around for 50 years, but in the last 10 years, it's come to the point that just about anyone can afford to purchase a plasma cutter. And what's amazing about it is if you can visualize having a piece of steel, let's say a half-inch thick piece of steel, and you have a device in your hand, a torch, we call it a torch, but you can think of it as a wand, And the thing is about, though, maybe 6 or 8 or a foot long, and you have a control on it. You touch that control, and the gas starts flowing, and then the arc jumps, and then the plasma starts. And what you do is you put that plasma, you touch it to the steel, and within seconds, you're taking a piece of half-inch steel and cutting it as if you had a knife through butter. To me, that's amazing.
We must work together on this, Victor.
That to me is wonderful. Yeah.
It would be so magnificent to be able to illustrate that and as experience in and of itself, and then to show how it works with dealing with the breaking down and the containment of energy. Chris, you had something to say? Oh, before you say anything, Chris, let me just add one comment. If people are calling in, we may or may not take callers in the second hour, but please feel free to jump into the chat room if you want to ask any questions, and we'll be getting to those questions soon. Chris, your thoughts?
I was going to say, when Victor was talking about the plasma cutter, I've used the plasma cutter, and it's wild. I mean, especially when you're doing it for a long period of time. Just the whole idea of that much power behind it and to go through that much metal is outstanding. If you could harness that power, I don't think there's anything that you couldn't.
So you mean harness the power of what the plasma cutter is doing?
Yes.
So then let's talk about what that means in terms of creating that energy from your own body, because my work is about that. I don't really see any difference between myself and the welding and the plasma cutting and all of this business, because as a profound energy, which is what each of us are, as a profound energy, then we are therefore able to connect to other profound energies in real time. And this is why, yes, it would be a bad idea to put your hand in the plasma cutter or to put your hand through the welding experience. That would be a bad idea. But what would not be a bad idea is to stand nearby and to take that energy and work with it. You know, there is definitely a magical, if you will, content to this. By magical, I mean that experience which a person has that causes them to be transformed in some way. And, we talked about this. We've talked about the Blood Project. We've talked about all that kind of thing. And doing these things in real time and presenting them would be extraordinary. And I would love to see that. I would love to see that happen. You know, Morgan, did you have some thoughts about containment and how to expand that regarding technology?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't use technology so much for containment. I do think it's absolutely marvelous that we have all these new tools that can actually kind of bring dreams into reality from our childhood dreams. Victor and I were privately messaging and saying this is amazing, that these things that we kind of dreamed of in science fiction from our childhood, well, now they've become reality. But as far as using containment, I tend to use more traditional methods, although I will say that adding magnetics to any containment device that I use, I found has increased its effectiveness a great deal. And this is something that lay people can do because you can actually purchase very strong magnets. You don't have to have a scientific laboratory. You don't have to have any sort of license for this sort of thing. So I think for myself, taking traditional implements that would normally be used for binding and containment and adding the actual force of magnetism to them has actually increased my effectiveness in this particular area.
Well, Victor, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's funny. You and I were sharing this new magnetic technology that we're using in our industry. There's a company that makes a magnet that can be turned on and off by reversing take two rare earth magnets, put them into a container, talk about containment, and when they're in one polarity, there's no magnetism, and when you turn it 90 degrees, or 180 degrees rather, you have a full magnetic field, and it's a very powerful magnetic field. It's made with neodymium rare earth magnets. And this concept of using magnetism technology, when I was a kid, I loved playing with magnets. I loved playing with electromagnets. I used to wind my own motors and wind my own electromagnets. These were the toys of my childhood and the fascination with it. But I want to say one other thing about technology. Do you know that just about everyone we know has an iron ring? Did you know that? Just about everyone we know has an iron ring. You know what I'm talking about?
Go ahead.
Okay. Every electronic device that's been made since 1930, including the modern computers, including radios, including televisions, including telephones and cell phones, has a thing called a choke in it, at least one choke. And what is a choke? A choke is a ferrite ring with wire wrapped through it, which is used to contain interference and stray signals. So everyone has an iron ring that contains stray energy in their home now, multiples.
You know, Victor, I find that extremely interesting because what happens is, you know, those wingnuts of us who sit around and spend our lives studying sorcery, and by wingnuts I mean that, of course, by the common thought about what it is to dedicate one's life to this, to this crazy magic, somewhat like a guy named Tesla did. And, you know, you look at the kind of life that we lead, and my entire life is just rich with the disincarnated and demons and this kind of work. I do sorcery all the time. It's all that I do, pretty much. And I don't mean all that I do, but I mean in terms of it is my path to do this work. And I find that comments like you just made now are startling. They're powerful. To realize that the very thing that we're talking about at the level of creating this sort of thing, standing still in the middle of nowhere, is something that is now really around us all the time. And eventually all this evens out. Eventually enough of us have the information and there's enough materials out there. So these things come together and they create a profound group of people who want to do the same kind of work. And it's the same with the magnetics thing. When I started talking about magnets and sorcery a while back, you know, people were saying, oh, well, that's nice. You know, where do you get these big magnets and all this stuff? And I use permanent ferrite magnets, the large, very large ones, the kinds that are in MRIs and this sort of MRI machines and this sort of thing. And I find that when I stand on them or when I carry them, that my work with containment is in some ways simpler. And it's not for every situation, but it is for many situations. But what has happened to me, and the point of this diatribe, is that I've become a piece of technology in a way, because I have a real sense of magnetism now in my hands. And I've carried magnets for so long and used them for so long and used them at the level of sorcery for so long that they have affected me. I have problems with my computers, my phone batteries short out, all sorts of things. We've talked about this before. So where does this technology separate from us? Where does the energy separate from us? Because my point in the work is always to show that everything from the high energy gases on the edge of the universe to the magnets in your pocket to the energy released from arc welding to plasma cutting, to things that Chris was talking about in terms of the things that we find on the ground, which is something I want to go back to. This is all the same energy. So comments on that?
I just wanted to say that from the time I was a child, I felt magnetism between my hands. And later on, when I formally got involved in energy healing, that intensified and my sense of it was greater, and my visualization of that also improved. But it's like, the funny thing for me is when I got back into the path in my late 30s, it was like being a child again. And I think this concept of being open and not closed and saying, you know what, the invisible is here. It's right in front of us, and all we have to do is see it. And I think that's something that, when you talk about the excitement that you get from the work that you do, it's the same excitement I feel with each discovery that I make. It's like being a child again.
It is. And, you know, when I sit and we talk with anybody about sorcery, sometimes I get very animated in my classes, and when I work with students independently and when I work with clients, it's almost as if I've never heard about it before. And I start talking about it as if it's a brand new thing to me. And I say, well, look, we have a magnet. You know, and people look at me like, yeah, I see your magnet. So what? And then I say, well, look what we're going to do with that magnet. And then they say, oh, well, okay, that's exciting. But I have this childlike excitement about this work every day of my life, and this is decades in, truly decades and decades in. So I very much appreciate what you're saying about the newness of how you found this again in your life, or still in your life. And that's so important because, the energy of our thoughts, ideas, and intentions is just as valid as the energy that comes off the welding arc. There's no difference. So in the effort, and I'll say this a number of times tonight, and I know that this group gets it, but in the bigger picture, the individual whose bedside you sit at, Victor, when someone is about to transition, or when someone comes to me and they have a demon in their house that's destroying their family, or Morgan is working with the kinds of high energy, the study of high energy magnetics and all of Morgan's work, and when Chris is talking about being on the hilltop, essentially, and seeing from the perspective, the terrestrial perspective, the power in that energy, the power in the ground, what he can do with standing next to a tree the rest of us can just admire. That this is all just the same thing, and that the demons themselves are the same thing. The energy that we're trying to contain is the energy that we already have, and that's what makes it so, so interesting. And so many cultures have talked about their method of containment and what it's all about. And I think that their own resources start to play a part in that. Chris, do you want to take it and talk a little bit about the history or the kinds of containments you've done? And I know that you do powwow medicine and all sorts of magnificent stuff.
Well, the one thing that we got to remember with the older people, the ancient people, that basically passed all this stuff down to us, they didn't have all this technology that we have, okay? So you have to go back to how did they do this stuff? How could just one person, have this contained? Now, we've got magnets, we've got, welding, we've got electricity, we've got all kinds of technology that we can tap into. And how did they do it? They had to, number one, their mind had to be open. You have to be open to the idea that you can do this type of thing, that it exists, that it's real. Because if you don't believe, I don't care what you have, it's not going to work. Secondly,
go ahead. I was going to add something to that, but go ahead.
And secondly, they didn't have the pollution in the earth that we have now, as far as different kinds of things that didn't belong there. We have a lot of static in the atmosphere that we have to fight our way through to do this kind of work nowadays. I think maybe that we are a little bit weaker than what they used to be, because we don't develop ourselves the same way as they do. We're not as in tune to it. They could feel things. I mean, when I talk to people nowadays, like I said, I know people that are supposedly, and I use that term loosely, witches, Wiccans, whatever the hell you want to call it, and they can't even sense what direction they're going to. Well, if you can't sense where you're at, you're missing half of this.
Yeah.
That's where you get
there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that, Chris.
That's your power is from the earth. I mean, that's where you pull it up from. If you can't use yourself as a conductor, basically, and use the magnetism in the earth, figure out where the hell ley lines are, figure out where your directions in the wind are, things like this, you can't do the containment work.
You know what, Chris? I want to jump in for 1 second and interrupt you, because you're absolutely right. There's a sense of laziness that happens in a generation that has everything delivered to them in under 4 seconds. And being a person who, I talk about digital natives and digital immigrants, and I'm a digital immigrant. My daughter's a digital native. So what happens is you and I know how to do things like real research, like look things up in a card catalog, like have to go out into the woods and find a particular type of bark. We know how to do these things. And the idea that there is a generation now, and it's not about generation bashing, it's about just talking about the way that people have learned to function. They don't have this groundwork of patience to learn what is necessary to do this kind of work. I mean, is that kind of what you're saying?
Right. We're becoming a dying breed, and it's going to be a shame when there's nobody like us left. because there's going to be a lot of people. Well, we talked about it last night.
Yeah.
About using the demons and things as our protectors, more or less, from going on outside of the world. Well, if we're gone, there's going to be nobody here to use that.
Well, we were talking about that in class last night. We were talking about how you have to learn how to deal with what's around you.
Right. And if I could just jump in real quick, I think part of this really has to do with intent, because it's not that the younger people have lost the ability to do these things that we're talking about. That's very much there. But their intent is actually to hook into an entirely different universe. They're hooked into the universe of the iPhone, as you mentioned, instantly getting everything, instantly communicating, never being unattached. And Chris, you were saying earlier that we have an awful lot of static and an awful lot of stuff that we have to get through as traditional energy workers or people who are going through those things. I think that's a part of it. I think that there actually really is a cloud of growing energy based on all these people who are hooked in to getting instant gratification, getting instant information, and not knowing how to be in touch with the natural world. And that, in some senses, could end up blocking us. If there are too few of us who are doing the traditional work, this could overshadow us, and it could become a new normal. And I would really hate to see that happen. But the thing is, our intent makes our reality. So that means those of us who are working with these traditional methods have to fight that much more strongly to preserve them, because we're not only facing whatever entities that we're dealing with in our everyday life, we're also dealing with this new intent that's coming to us from the way the younger generation and people around the world are just living their lives and choosing to reshape their reality.
The other aspect of it is that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go right ahead, Victor. Go ahead.
The other aspect of that is that these young people are tethered or connected by this umbilical cord into this nexus of delivery of energy without any intention. And I'm really afraid that I'm not afraid, I'm concerned that the inability to connect on a real level, having a real conversation, dealing with real feelings, not being divorced from the reality of the physical world in the abstract context of the video world. This whole concept of the warriors who use the drones, that's an extension of video games. There's no connection between pushing that button and a person dying on the ground. There's no connection because it's a video game.
Right.
And I think we need to get back to the real, the physical, the connection to Earth, the connection to one another, in order to really to save what we have in the work that we've all done.
It's interesting that people cannot function if they have no cellular service. They go crazy. It's like they don't even know what to do next. If the internet goes down, even in your house, people walk around like they don't know what to say, they don't know how to communicate. Yes, we need it for business, we need it for various things, and yes, it is a delightful luxury. But my husband and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, how if something occurred in this very volatile world where the electricity stopped, there are people who would not know how to start a fire. There are people who would not know how to hunt if they had to. There are people who would not be able to function without this device in their hand. And that is a real serious issue, because if we're talking about containment, they have been contained from the other side.
Absolutely.
The technology has contained them. Morgan, you said something brilliant. You said they're reaching out to an entirely different universe. And that is well beyond my comment about digital natives and digital immigrants. I have a 14-year-old daughter who is not a pop culture kind of person. She doesn't play video games. She doesn't do those things. But she has the equipment that she needs to function in the education experience. She has an iPad. She has a phone. She has things like this. And her dedication to those things are oddly old world in a way, because she uses them to read books. So I see in her a different kind of usage. But then she'll talk about a friend of hers who, spent 8 hours yesterday playing, I think it was World of something. I don't know what video games there are, but it was, I remember it was World of something. And we just both looked at each other like, what? How is that even possible? And she just shook her head, and the way one person can tell you about a culture that you're not a part of, and she said, you don't even know. It was quite powerful in that sense. You know, I mean, if it all comes to crap, I want to be with Chris on a mountain somewhere because he's going to know exactly what to do.
Well, and quite frankly, not defending any of this, but this is a tool, and if used as a tool, how many of us would never have met or connected in reality had we not had this tool to connect and really. So yes, it's a powerful tool. There's an energy to it that's very positive if it's used in the proper way.
Well, we're in 4 different states. We're in 4 different states right now, I think. Yeah, 4 different states. And we're having this wonderful conversation, and we're offering it to people all over the world. Absolutely. And this is not about technology bashing. This is about using the technology and not having the technology use you. You know, when you meet someone who's not wearing their outfit's wearing them, it's the same kind of thing. It takes over your processing, and you can't process anymore. We were watching a film one time where I was with my daughter and a couple of her friends. It was about 2 years ago, and it was it might have been The Mummy when she's looking through the card catalog, and one of her friends said to me, "What is that?" And I just put my head down on the table, and I thought, oh, this is very sad. Because what happens when you go into a library and you look for something, if it's out, you have to do a thing called make another choice. And this is what's so startling to people who are controlled by technology is they never have to make another choice. They never have to look at their plan and re-strategize. It doesn't, Wikipedia doesn't run out. So what's containing what is, it goes back to my question about the energy that I'm using to contain a demon, its energy, the energy from a welding arc. What's containing what? This is a very interesting thing. I mean, Chris, when you're working, do you often work outside in the energy, or do you feel a difference outside or inside, indoors or outdoors in terms of the magnetism of the earth?
Well, if I can, I work outside, but I don't really want to scare the shit out of my neighbors. So,
yeah.
I do,
by the way. I do, by the way, want to scare the shit out of my neighbors, but that's just my preference.
The landlord kind of frowns on that. So, but I'm lucky enough to live close to an area where I have places that I can go and I can basically hide. I prefer to work outside because I'm closer to the source. If I'm inside, I'm on the second floor. Well, the further you are away from the earth, the less grounded you are. As far as, what I'm looking at. I'm thinking at it from an electrical standpoint. Electricity seeks its own ground. If I'm on the second floor, that means I'm elevated. I can't count on the structure of the house connecting me to the ground the way I want to be.
And there are people then between you and the ground. There's another set of people, perhaps, who offer an energy that.
There's wires, there's cables, there's all kinds of everything else that's underneath me. There's static. If I'm standing on the ground, I'm closer to where I need to get what I need to get the energy out that I need.
I have a student who is an American Indian, an actual American Indian, not somebody who likes to tag along with that whole thing and say, "Oh yeah, I'm part American Indian." And she talks about being barefoot. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. She talks about being barefoot when she works, and how feet on the ground are the best way to do the work. And she said that nobody in her culture has ever done their work any other way. I do know what tribe she's part of, but I don't want to, overextend speaking about someone who's not here. But she said to me that she's a young girl, she's 19. She said that it seems odd to her that people think that you can stand anywhere and do anything and not respect. And by respect, I think she means understand the energy of the planet and where it's coming from and what you're part of. And she said to be contained within that energy is to be able to use that energy. So from her point of view, being on the ground barefoot is the way to go. And there's a lot of this sort of cultural stuff that is very valuable and needs to be talked about. I'd like to move in that direction if everybody's comfortable with that, and not to over-direct, but just I think it would be interesting to talk about our cultures and the things that we use to do containment. Anybody want to pick that up?
Sure, I'll go ahead and start. Now, my cultural background personally is Germanic and Slavic, but I have never really felt a connection with those particular energies. So, and I've tried. I've really tried and approached them with open arms and totally objective, but it just never meshed for me. But I have managed to work with other cultures. So when I talk about containment, when I talk about energy work, I said last week when I was introducing myself that I'm kind of a free agent. I will take what works, and I will always use it respectfully. I loathe the cultural appropriationism that we see so often, which you alluded to when you were talking about people who, kind of try to pretend to be Native American and, maybe they have 1/16th, but they really have no understanding of the culture. But some of the techniques I use, for example, for containment, I will use Tibetan ritual items, such as furbas, because for me, they are a visual trigger. This is a 3-bladed knife that usually has on the end of the handle a very fierce deity, and this goes back to pre-Buddhist times in Tibet and Nepal and Bhutan and that region when there was a shamanic tradition, and it's actually used, the furba was actually used to pin a recalcitrant spirit or to restrain a recalcitrant spirit. Now, the fact that you can get these in iron, and iron is easy to magnetize, makes it a double plus for me. But there are other items I use too. And we had mentioned earlier, way at the beginning of this show, Chris had mentioned never pick up an iron spike left in the forest, an iron railroad tie. And I have used iron railroad ties as binding devices too. They're pretty good, and they have a tie into the African diaspora religions with connections to the spirits called the Ogun. And the Ogun spirits are very strong warriors. They're very strong allies. And if you are facing some nasty entity, that's definitely the type of energy you want to have on your side. So this has worked for me. But I do try to limit as the cultural appropriationism as much as I can, because I don't want people to think I'm one of these people who's a shaman today and then a witch tomorrow and then off on some other path, 2 weeks from now, because I've run into plenty of those people. And I don't know how they can keep any of their life organized, because they are supposedly following so many paths that it's just, to me, they're jacks of all trades and masters of none.
Morgan, nobody would ever accuse you of being a sudden shaman. You are so solid in a practice that is brilliantly sketched out, in the sense that you find stuff that works and you honor it and be part of it. And that is very different than claiming it, which is a different experience. I think that there was a period of time in my life where I felt like everyone wanted to be Italian. And there was a lot of TV about it and a lot of stuff going on, and I thought, well, that's interesting to me, because I have friends who have said the same things about their cultures in various periods of time. And I'm Sicilian, and we are the black sheep. We are the spookiest of all Italians. Even other Italians think we're creepy. So the sense of blood in our culture is everywhere. We talk about blood while we're making sauce. We talk about menstrual blood, while other people are at the table. In everybody's house, there's some, well, not everyone, but a lot of houses, there's always some sort of illustration of the person they refer to as Jesus holding his own heart in his hand, blood dripping down his face. So there's all this kind of sense of the energy of blood. So it's really a subtext. But if you talk to old, let's just say, Italian witches, and the term strega is not a Sicilian term, it's a Neapolitan term, so we don't really use that term. But if you talk to women, especially, more so than men, who, in my culture, who have involved themselves in this aspect of our culture as their work, or as what they're known as, they have a very interesting, visceral way of handling containment. We have a thing called whispering in the pig's ear. And this is something that only other people who have come from serious Sicilian backgrounds have ever heard of. And I haven't really written about it. 13 books later, maybe I'll write something about it. But there's a thing called whispering in the pig ear, and Italians will buy a half a pig head or a whole pig head when they're at their salumeria and put that on the table. It's an interesting thing. And whoever's in charge of the sorcery for the family, if there's a problem, will sit with people and talk about it and slice off the pig's ear and whisper the story into it as it needs to be contained. And then a number of things are done with this pig ear. There's spitting on it, and there's putting your blood in it, and there's all manner of putting suffering into it, and as if you've whispered everything you've got that's ugly or uncontrollable or uncomfortable into this pig's ear. And then it's shoved into a glass bottle that is almost too small to hold it, so that it has to eat in upon itself to get smaller and smaller. And when you see these things a year later, in the tightest closed lid where something should remain either gone moldy or just remain in its own sort of stew, if you will, they become smaller and smaller and smaller and hard and become tiny leathered things. And you will see them carried by some people who are from the culture or sewn into their clothes. And this is how they have these anti-magnets, if you will, to push away demons. And this is a very unusual story and not one that, many people want to talk about. But the fact that I do this work is what makes it necessary for me to talk about. And that's just one of the ways that we deal with containment. It has an after effect of, I'm wearing this right in your face, so come at me. If you want to come at me, come at me. I'm sure you can all imagine in the culture that I come from that that's not an uncommon kind of statement. But it's not a forever seal. It's a sealing. It's an I showed you I could do it. Now don't come near me because I'll do it to you again. I'll do it to the next one. I'll do whatever's necessary. Anybody want to follow that up?
Yeah, I'm just going to say it's interesting because we're going to go from a pig's ear to a kosher chicken. and coming from my background, I'm 3/4 German Jew, and then 1/8 Italian and 1/8 Irish. That's my background. And my grandparents, my father's parents, were Orthodox. My father was non-observant; he was totally secular. But in Judaism, especially the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox Jews, there's a form of containment for the sins during the time of Yom Kippur, which is the period known as the Days of Awe, the Days of Atonement, the Day of Atonement. And the practice is called Kapporot or Kapporus. And the ultra-Orthodox Jews will go to a special place, a Kapporus center, and they will buy a chicken, and the money is given to charity. And what they'll do is they'll take the chicken by the neck and swing it around their head 3 times. And as they're doing that, they say a prayer which in essence is transferring whatever their sins or shortcomings have been into this chicken. And then the chicken is slaughtered and the sins are transmuted. So it's done once a year during the High Holy Days. And, it's interesting to me that here's another way of containing something, the energy of the shortcoming, the energy of the sin in this tradition.
Well, isn't that the same?
Go ahead, Chris.
Wasn't that the beginning of that was for the 2 goats on the Day of Atonement, yes, which is where we get the term scapegoat?
Absolutely.
And if I butcher this, I'm sorry. Where one goat was used for God, and the other one was used to send into the desert for Azazel.
Absolutely.
This is also where we get the term "swing a dead chicken over your head." And
my best friend, I have to tell you.
Well, there's a joke there, and I ain't going anywhere
I don't
near it.
even know what it is.
Yeah.
But I had to get in there because I've seen this. I've actually seen this in action, and I as powerful as it is, it certainly has a sense of levity to it and severity at the same time. It's a very interesting experience. Morgan, you were saying something. I want to follow up on this, Victor. But Morgan, you were saying something.
I was just saying my best friend who knows my penchant for working with the Loa and voodoo and that, he can read me, and I'm pretty good at masking my face. But he knows when someone has pissed me the hell off. And he gets that look on his face, and as soon as we're alone, he goes, uh-oh, I know somebody is in store for a drive-by chickening, because he's expecting me to leave a dead chicken on this guy's doorstep or whoever it is, and don't think I haven't done it.
I bet you have, Morgan. I bet you have. Sometime you and I are going to go after the same guy, and I'll get a little chicken and a little pork, and that'll be how that'll work. Victor, regarding this, may I ask, and if it's too personal of a question, please feel free to tell me that it's not appropriate to ask, but were the Orthodox members of your family Lubavitch?
No. They were okay. Ashkenazi. They were just Orthodox. They were what they call Orthodox, just Orthodox. Yeah, they weren't. They were not a member of any of the Hasidic sects. Okay,
because my Lubavitch friends do this, and it's a huge deal, And there are other times in their calendar in which they, store their differences with each other in bits of bread and feed it to ducks. They do that. So there's a whole bunch of those kinds of. You're familiar with that. And there's a great deal of that. The area of Jewish Orthodoxy in which I am the most familiar is the Lubavitch, because I have a lot of friends in that area. Why they're friends with me, I have never really been able to understand. But they seem to gravitate towards me in this one particular group of people. And I learned a great.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I learned a great deal.
You go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, Victor, you go. Go ahead.
That practice with the bread is known as tashlich, and what they do is they take bread or various types of rolls or any kind of baked good, and they cast it into the waters, doing the same thing. So these are people, and these are really people who don't believe in killing animals. So they'll take bread or something else. You can throw it literally into the river or to a lake or to a stream where the birds can get it and eat it, and they're casting away their sins that way also. But it's just to mention, there's a young fellow that I knew who became a convert through Lubavitch, and he went to the Kapora Center, and the rabbi said, he says, what you do is you take the chicken, you say the prayer, and he says, I don't know the prayer, and the rabbi said, just wing it.
Oh, Victor, that's a thinking man's joke.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Just wing it. That's pretty funny. I found the time that I've spent amongst the Lubavitch to be very interesting, because they are sorcerers. They hate when I say that, but I say, you guys are sorcerers. You're studying the Kabbalah. You're doing all of this magic. You're sorcerers. And they have an enormous respect for animals. You're right, like extraordinary. And will go out of their way to find a way to deliver to an animal instead of take from an animal. And I do see that over and over again. They are, however, very, very interested in the containment of demons. And the debut for them is a daily concern and a very widespread practice.
Yes.
And I've seen it. I've seen it in their homes. I've seen it in people organizing and coming together to take care of this. I was very open about it, even in my first book, dedicating it to Menachem Schneerson, and this caused all sorts of upsetment amongst those who thought that was inappropriate. I had a personal experience with him. I met him. He held my hand, and that was a very strange and unusual thing for him to do. I went to this thing where you stand online and you give the $1 and he blesses it and you give it back, because I didn't know what people were doing.
Yes.
I was in Borough Park. And I was in my, full regalia of the way that I appear in this world. And I saw a line, so I got on it. I wanted to have the experience everyone else was having. So I simply stood on that line, and everyone said, you have to have your $1. I got my $1 ready. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I went, they led me 3 men and then 3 women. It went back and forth like that. And when I got up to him, I didn't know what to do. Nobody told me anything. And I handed him the $1, and he makes some sort of motion over it, and he hands it to his associate and takes a different $1 that he's handled and gives it back to you, and it's your blessed $1. And I said thank you, and then he grabbed both of my hands, pulled me close to him and whispered in my ear, and told me I could never repeat what he said. So I didn't realize the enormity of this kind of thing. And, we're talking about containment tonight, and it was interesting to me to see how he was holding the energy of the room. And if he had brushed hair away from his face, people would talk about why he did that at a specific time. It was so unbelievably intense. And I got to the door, and I was so surrounded and packed by all these boys who wanted to know what he said, and And this group of women came and got me, literally pulled me out of that, and put me in a cab and told me to go away. So I did, because it occurred to me it was time to leave the party. And I went away. And before I went away, one of them handed me a phone number on a piece of paper. So I called her, and she said to me, I need your address. And I said, I'm not going to give you my address. You put me in a cab. You told me to go away. And she said, I need your address. We want to send you a present. All right. So I decided I'd give them an address for which I could get materials, and I did. And I got a letter from the Rebbe, a handwritten letter from the Rebbe. And I carried that letter around for about 5 or 6 weeks before I opened it, for one reason and one reason only. It was hot. It was on fire. It was hard to hold. It contained in it something that nothing else I've ever held could contain. And I finally read it, and it was a very short letter, and he had said just one thing he needed me to know. And we continued to talk to each other on occasion until he became sick and was in Beth Israel Hospital. And I knew the moment he died. And he has assisted me in my life in such a profound way as a disincarnate who is nearby all the time. And he said to me, he told me quite a bit about containment. He said the thing to do when you're involved in containment is to know that it's already contained because you have decided to contain it. And from that, I mean, from right now I'm sort of like, it's getting really hot in the room just whenever I talk about that. And it was almost as if that was all I ever needed to know. So talking about
shared with you. He shared with you the ultimate magical truth, and that's that intention is everything. The intention does it. It's done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the fact that he recognized you as a kindred spirit and welcomed you in that way is quite a blessing. That's very unique and very rare and wonderful.
Yeah, it was startling when I realized afterwards the capacity of stepping outside of his own containment that he had to do just to talk to me or just to touch my hands. And what I noticed from him was that nothing else mattered except where he was standing in his own truth all the time.
Absolutely.
And that was extraordinarily powerful. I learned more in that moment about energy than I think that I have learned before or since.
And what our listeners might not know, is that aside from being the head of the Lubavitch movement, his early life, he was a physicist.
Yes, he was. He
was a scientist.
Absolutely. Yes, he was. His father was a chemist, and his grandfather was the chief Rebbe, and then he was a physicist. Yes, that's absolutely true. The man knew more about science than he knew about anything, and it was startling to see him in this position holding. I mean, talk about containment, and I'd like to go this way a little bit, talk about containment, holding the energy of people, holding them in place in that way to get the information to them. Incredible.
Absolutely.
It was incredible.
Absolutely.
Thoughts? I think Chris lost us for a minute. Chris, are you back?
He's back.
Okay.
Chris, you
I
back?
think so. Hey, Chris.
You back?
I've got him online, but...
Anybody want to say, can you hear me now? Or is that copyright infringement?
It might be, but we can contain them.
We can contain them. That's right. There you go, Morgan. Is he still on the air? Did we get him back?
Yeah, I think he's still on, but I can't hear him, so I'm not sure what's going on with this guy.
Let's share that with him so he knows that we can't hear you.
Okay.
You know, last night I was teaching a demon class, and the demons had me last night before I got to them. That was very interesting. Whenever I teach a demon class, and I teach using a thing called GoToMeeting, which is like multiple screens on Skype, but it's very useful because it can record the class. And whenever I teach a class about demon work, there's, my demons are in the room, and they talk and they hiss, and she, one of my attending demons, screams, at the top of her lungs, and it causes all kinds of static, and everyone says, oh, here we go with the demons in demon class. Last night I had a different energy when I came to class. I have been through a number of crazy things. Is anyone else hearing an echo?
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, of course, because I'm talking about demons. Okay, here we go. Case in point. Case in point. So I came to this class with a little bit of a different energy last night. I was going to talk about 6 demons. I was going to group them into 3 groups and talk about how we use them and how we contain them and how we get involved in relationships with them and all this sort of thing. And I connected them to a group of sigils. It was a very powerful class. And if people are interested in that, then they should go to the site and talk and read this thing about Wednesday night 4 classes. But just as I began to talk about them, I set up the whole class the same way I've set it up 1,000 times before, or maybe 500 times before, and the students could not hear me. I did nothing different. I had to shut it down and start over. They still couldn't hear me. I had to finally just try and make a deal, and then they could hear me. They were containing the information. So what happens on the other side when the energy is containing us, and we have to break out of that and readjust ourselves in the presence of that kind of energy? Chris, are you back?
I think I am.
Yay!
Could you hear me?
You are.
You are. You are, in fact, back. Chris, you do powwow magic, powwow work. Tell us about when that energy, and I know that the energy of that is so huge. When you put it out, it stands in front of you. Tell me how you respond to it, how you contain it when you need to contain it, when you don't need to contain it. Tell me how you work in that, because the energy of that is very interesting to me.
Well, what I usually do, and I've taken a lot of hits from doing it this way, but it's the only way I know how to do it, is if it's something like you were having problems last night, I have a tendency to get a little loud with what I'm dealing with.
Not you, Chris.
I mean, I don't deal with it calmly. I'm not passive when it comes to what I'm dealing with. And I think that's where I get my energy from, is when I let my rage get involved with it.
That's right.
And I pretty much, I'm not going to deal with this. You are not going to do this to me. You are not going to sit there and shake my table. You're not going to, hurt this person anymore. This is what you're going to do, and I'm telling you you're going to do it. Now, there's different doctors that practice what I practice, and they pretty much do the same damn thing, but they use a Bible verse for it. Well, I don't do that because I think it's garbage.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to let a piece of paper, take my place. I don't believe in it. You were talking about sewing things into your garment. That's a big thing here with things from the Bible. It's called the Himmelsbrief, and what it basically is it breaks down to the Word of God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of what they want, that'll protect them and things like that. Well, no, I'm writing it down, okay? So I'm the agent that you got to worry about. I'm the one putting the energy into it for the containment. It's not coming from a god or whatever the hell. It's the same way I do it with my work. I impose my will onto what I'm dealing with. It takes a lot out of me. It is really hard on the body, and the older I get, the more I feel it. It's the only way I know how to do it. It also goes over into the work that I do for sin eating sometimes, that I'm trying to take on what these people have gotten into their self before they die. A lot of times they do have something in there that's, I don't want to say demonic, but something that has that kind of energy to it. Well, it's got to come out of there somehow. And what I'll do in a case like that is I'll use an egg. That goes back to the old Slavic term, back to Russia and all that they used an egg to put a demon into. I'll lay it on their chest and try to get whatever is in there into that egg, and then I'll go and dispose of the egg. Another thing that I use, and you will never see it, one of them on my body, I don't give a damn who gives it to me, and I don't care how big it is is a diamond.
Yeah, they're dangerous.
Right, and they're known to be used to carry demons in them because of the hardness. It's a good way to attract them, and once they get inside, you can't get the hell back out.
Well, the molecular structure of diamonds and carbon, that has a lot to do with it. The molecular structure of diamonds is very exacting. It's, the carbon's pyramid on top of one another. And therefore, it can be pretty much able to take the deepest and the most intense energies within itself. There's no space. It envelops. They're very dangerous.
Right. And like I said, you'll never see one on my body. I will never own a diamond. I don't give a damn. I don't care what it is. I don't care how big it is. And that all goes back to, if you think about it, all the problems that people have had with the Hope diamond. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Well, the structure of diamonds makes it pretty simple for them to attach. And the Hope diamond is not what it is because of folklore. It is what it is because people who have had extraordinary sorrow and extraordinary vengeance have used it that way. And that's why it is what it is. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
Just have.
Pictures. I haven't seen it in person.
Yeah, I have at the Smithsonian event a number of years ago where they displayed it. And I will tell you that the energy from that thing is powerful. It is not folklore. If you know what you're looking for and you stand in front of it, I couldn't even get too close to it. I felt like this was something very uncomfortable that didn't belong to me, that I didn't want any part of. Victor, have you ever seen it, the Hope diamond?
I've seen in feng shui. I studied feng shui for a couple of years, and there's a ceremony called the golden cicada, in which you take an egg and you dye it a certain color, and basically what you do is you use the egg as a container for all of the bad luck and misfortune that you may have at a given time of the year. And then once that's done, then the egg is disposed of. But that's another ceremony using an egg.
I wanted to ask you, Chris, do you use a fertilized egg or an unfertilized egg? I have a reason for asking this question.
You're supposed to use a fertilized egg, but you kind of use whatever you have available.
Because the egg, in a sense, is containing both life and death. If you think about it, it's a food source within itself. If it's fertilized, then it's feeding the chick in that way. If it's not fertilized, then it is essentially a lost life, if you want to think of it that way. So the egg has a lot of history in that sense, a lot of ideas about what it can be used for. In the Sicilian culture, you open an egg and you drop it into hot water or into some kind of soup, and you sort of read how much of the white is spread out and how much tentacles it has, if you will. And in that culture, that is a method of divination in which we look at how fractured or how confused the problem is. And if in the event that the yolk comes apart in the water instead of just becoming more and more solid, then there's a thought that there's duplicity in life. So the egg has a place in a lot of cultures in so much as its usefulness throughout, I guess, many of our backgrounds.
Yeah,
Thoughts?
I know that from the Latin American cultures, this is also used as a method of divination. Very often an egg is rubbed over a person to determine what type of energy is surrounding them, and then you crack the egg and you drop it into a glass of water, and like you said, Sorceress, you read the patterns that the yolk and the white are making, and there are all these different interpretations how far the yolk is floating. But I've spoken to some people within the Latino community here in Atlanta and to do this sort of work, and they've mentioned that it's usually easier for them to do it in in their home countries because they can have easier access to fertilized eggs. It's hard to get fertilized eggs here in an urban environment, and they feel that it's not quite as effective when they don't have that fertilized egg because they say there's something about it, that life energy that really picks up when there's something negative attached to a person, and that will give you a really accurate reading, whereas if you're using an egg that is essentially dead, it isn't nearly as sensitive a divination technique.
Sure. That's absolutely true. That's always been what I've heard in my culture as well. When I use carbon rods for corporal necromancy, and that is another show pretty much in terms of what that is actually about. One of the reasons that the carbon rods are so helpful in getting the energy from me into the body is because of the spaces between the carbons. So, carbon is taking all kinds of forms, and there's plenty of carbon in the egg, fertilized or unfertilized. So if you look at it for what it is, it's actually the same thing, fertilized or unfertilized, but the life force and the sense that if you left it alone, it would become something. That being the energy within it is what I think is the difference between using the other forms of carbon and other forms of eggs that are unfertilized and the fertilized eggs. Victor, did you have a comment you wanted to make about containment? I think you said something about it before.
Yeah, just one other thing. If you look at the ultimate containment in the Hebrew or the Jewish tradition, the Ark of the Covenant was the ultimate containment. The Ark of the Covenant was something that had tremendous energy contained within it. And anyone who was not handling it properly, according to the mythology behind it, could be electrocuted, could be shocked with lightning, who knows, could be burned. And the concept being it was this chest that was designed based on what was dictated by Yahweh to Moses and to Aaron and to the priests of the Hebrew priests of the day, and it supposedly contained the Ten Commandments and also Aaron's staff or Aaron's rod, which for all intents and purposes is a magic wand, and also a golden bowl of manna, which was this wonderful ultimate food that was used to feed them in the desert when there was nothing else to eat. And it had to be carried in a certain way, and you had to use poles through these holders to carry it. So again, this was a very, very powerful device holding a tremendous amount of power or energy. And I think for in Judaism, this is the ultimate containment.
Victor, do you feel that the Ark of the Covenant existed, or do you feel that the energy of having such an object is just as powerful? Because I think that's an interesting topic.
I think both. I think there probably was a true artifact, the Ark of the Covenant. What happened to it, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. But I believe also that the Ark of the Covenant is an intentional form of containment. And what it basically is, it was the containment of the foundational information of Judaism. It had the foundation of all the Abrahamic religions within it. And so you have the physical containment, but you also have the spiritual or mental containment, the emotional containment that people carried with them, so that if they were true to the law, then they contained it within themselves.
I'm glad you brought that up, because artifacts are the sort of the baseline for containment in a lot of ways. There are many things that are thought of in that way. Maybe not in the same way as the Ark of the Covenant, but there's so much like that. And much of it is connected to religion, because people have to connect the idea of energy to a divinity or a deity. Most people do. Those of us who don't do that, and, that just happens to be where I am in my world. For me, the only thing that I accept, and I want to talk about this word believe for a minute, because I don't believe in anything. I know what I see, and that's what I enjoy, and that's what I experience. The people who have strong beliefs say to me all the time, how can you function without some kind of God, without some kind of divinity? And for me, the sense of a higher power, if you will, and I prefer that kind of a comment, is that we are part of this profound and endless and grand energy. Chris and I talk about a lot about, if I need something, he's here for me. If he needs something, I'm there for him. And we say that to each other a lot. And I sometimes think about what that means, Chris, and the power of that, and the energy, that just the intention of us being in each other's lives. So for me, the idea of a divinity or a deity is that we have all got the ability to tap into this power. So you talk about something like the Ark of the Covenant, whether it ever existed or not is not really what's relevant. What's relevant is that there is an enormous acceptance of that powerful object. So therefore, does it exist? Thoughts?
Well, I think, coming from a Catholic background myself, that really translates into how I see the idea of relics, because, and I've gone to a lot of churches where they have any number of relics, and I've taken some friends in there, and 9 times out of 10, if they don't have any background in Catholicism, they're totally freaked out by the idea that there are bits and pieces of dead people in these beautiful things. But we don't know whose tooth that really is. We don't know whether that sliver of wood was part of the true cross, and probably, if you look at it logically, probably was not, because if all those pieces of wood were really part of the true cross, then the true cross was the size of the Empire State Building, because there are so many floating around. So, but the belief that there is something in there, that's what really connects it. That's where the power comes from, I think, the belief that people put into it. There's another relic. It's not really a relic. It's a ritual item called the wish-fulfilling gem in Buddhism. And it supposedly fell from the sky and was transferred from king to king to king in various Eastern kingdoms and could grant you anything you wanted. But that, to me, is just solidifying an intent. I don't think that there was really this magical item that really could grant these things. I think it was a focal point for people. They put their power into it, and they got out what they put into it. So they maybe were able to do miraculous things with this sort of a thing. The same way as if you touch a relic of a saint, or you touch a cloth to the tomb of a saint or something, maybe something comes away with it, but it's what you bring to it. It's your intent that actually energizes that item.
I absolutely agree with you, because in blood sorcery, when someone sends me their blood to do work on them, or they offer it to me in person, I think that is just as vital as this idea of first-degree relics, which are body parts or something with blood soaked on them, and that the energy of the self is so profound that it's relevant in sorcery. It's relevant in everything. I'm extraordinarily honored when somebody trusts me with a biological. I can't imagine, the power behind that is so intense. I can't imagine what they're thinking when they give it to me. Are they thinking, is it going to be okay? Is it not going to be okay? Some people give it over quite easily, and some people are very concerned about what I'm going to do with it later and this kind of thing. But the idea of relics. There's a church in Manhattan, I think it's John the Baptist, that has the socks of Padre Pio in it. Yeah, you've done that, right, Victor? Yeah.
Yes.
So it has the socks of Padre Pio in it, and I'm fascinated when I go there. I visited there a number of times to see that and to watch other people observe it. The energy of the other people observing it is fascinating to me. It's as if there's some sort of energy force around it created by the people who are viewing it. If nobody cared, it would just be a sock with some blood on it and be long gone. But it's the energy of people's participation. And I think that people's participation with all things defines the energy around the object. Because if you're walking through the woods and you said you find something on the ground and you don't touch it, the action of not touching it, of showing the respect to it, what do you think that offers to the original source of the work being done with that object?
I think to the person that did the work, the one that did the spell work, whatever you want to call it, that's almost like a tipping of my hat to that. I'm not disturbing something that they put there hoping that it wouldn't be disturbed. I mean, unless somebody's got it in for me and put it, knew I was going to be there and put it out there in my way. But by then, it's like, well, then screw you. But anybody that was doing, that was doing it for somebody else, like I said, if I walk by, it's like a tipping of the hat, to say, I respect what you've done, and I'm not going to disturb it. Going
Chris,
back.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No.
Go ahead.
All right. I've met you in person, and I will tell you, you bring it. there's something about you that is a real don't fuck with me sign. It's like, I have a relationship with you that's different. Of course, we share these intimate stories and this intimate work that we're both very much involved with. But you are the kind of person who can either open your arms and be extraordinarily endearing or shut you down with just your energy. You're very powerful that way. And when I first met you, I thought, wow, this is as magnificent as I thought it was going to be. Having Chris in my space was like the most uninterrupting experience I've had with having people around, one of the most. And it felt so natural for Chris to come into my space and be there. It felt like I'm bringing my energy. I know that you respect my energy, so therefore my energy is comfortable here. And having had the exact opposite with other people who have come into the studio, it's so extraordinary to me. We talk about relics, we talk about things, but the energy that the person brings when they come into the room is the whole story. Going back to what the Rebbe said to me, if you're standing in the moment of the intention, it's already happened. So, Chris, I don't even know if you realize this, that you bring this sort of code with you, that this is how it's going to be when you enter the space. So when you step up to an item and don't touch it, this is why I asked you this question specifically. I imagine that the respect that you show by that knowledge is very, very well felt, and in my thought, it would move forward the energy of the original intention of the object. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I try not to disturb anybody's space, and if I find an object like that, that's somebody's space. I mean, somebody put that there. So I don't want to get into, like, when I walked into the studio, which is absolutely fabulous.
Thank you.
That's your space, okay? I try to make myself belong there. When I was in the Marines, they told us something, what camouflage really is. It isn't so much putting trees in your hat and all kinds of shit like that. It's making sure you look like you belong there. So that takes different meanings, at least in my head. If I'm someplace and I have to blend in, or I should blend in, I try to make myself look like I belong there.
But I felt from you something even more perfect than that. I felt that you were able to bring your energy and respect where you were and expect respect back. And in that sense, you were both invisible and 100% present. Does that make sense to everybody?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a level of integrity, and that's what really carries a person of power. They don't have to do outlandish things to get people's attention. They're just being there is absolutely the focal point. We go back to the Rebbe that you were speaking about, but it's every person who really has that centered focus of power is at home wherever they are and can fit in wherever they are. And that's because essentially they know how to use the energy of wherever they are and to attune themselves to it perfectly. And that's, for me, that's one of the key essences of sorcery, is being able to meld with that energy perfectly so that you can use it or not use it as you choose.
It's interesting you say or not use it as you choose, because when I teach a class, I start with some sort of bizarre tangential thing, and after 2 hours it's all wrapped up in one circle and everybody understands why I started with that. And this show is actually happening the same way, because the containment of the self is very interesting to me. I can walk into a place and have 1,000 people look at me, or I can walk into a place and have no one see me. The decision is mine. And I'm very, very good at it now. The containment of my own energy and making it apparent or not apparent is to me the highest form of this work, because you can use that not only to make yourself visible or invisible in a group or to make yourself safe if you have to, but you use that when you're working with demons, working with the disincarnate, working with any kind of energy, doing long-distance critical healing. I make myself invisible in the critical healing and then suddenly visible as part of the process, as part of what I do. And I think that it's very important to understand that containment is not necessarily a word about pulling back, but it can be very much a word about fitting into what it is that we want to possess, the possession of our own space, the containment of ourselves in the appropriate space. Victor, you have a thought?
I agree. You know, you were talking about Rabbi Schneerson. Here was a man who was very modest, very humble, only gave what he absolutely felt he should give at the appropriate time. And yet his followers actually gave him the attribution that he was the Messiah. Yes. And that after his passing he would return. That's the power. Now, this man never asked for that. He never claimed it. But that was the power that he exuded amongst the people he was with, because he was there as a presence of wisdom. He was there as a presence of love. And in doing so, this following gathered around him and said, this guy is as close to perfection as there is in a human being. And I think that sort of defines it. And
to his own credit, he was quite humble in that, and almost a little embarrassed by it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he used to on occasion sneak out and get a cab and just be alone for a little while, and this made people insane. People were.
And here's a guy. Yeah, here's a guy. He could have demanded anything, and yet he contained himself. He knew who he was and what he was about, and he never did it. Yeah. Absolutely.
There are people who need to be honored for their ability to do that. You know, it's not about religion. It's about the human experience, the person that we're talking about. I'm going to actually start to wrap up the show because I like to end a little bit early and give people a little bit of time to think. You know, Victor, I want to say something about your energy. When I hear your voice on the radio, I'm always just really happy. That's not a word I use very often. You bring to this a sense of kindness and wisdom, and I said that at the beginning of the show, and I want to acknowledge everyone tonight because this is really important to me. I've worked very hard over many decades to have this kind of a group, both in my student core group and on the radio in this moment, and I'm just extraordinarily grateful to have you on the show, Victor, because you bring an experience that is different from everyone else's, and never will I ever, talking to you, mistake kindness for weakness. And I want you to know that I think of you in this extraordinary way, and that tonight it's important for me to say that. We've worked hard to pull this team together, and I'm very grateful for that. And if anyone doesn't mind these extraordinary accolades, I must say that, Morgan, coming in the way that you did to pick up this show and to bring your extraordinary ability to do research and your knowledge, and Morgan is, by the way, a fantastic author, so please, when we talk about how to find us, get the book. I want to acknowledge you for that because it's been extraordinary that you jumped in this way and offered your life experience and your work as part of this show. Oh, you're absolutely welcome. And in a minute, everybody take a minute to say how you can be reached. And Chris, you know, I know that I sort of gush on you, but your experience, they don't even know yet what you know, Chris. You don't even know what you know yet. It's tremendous. The more I talk to Chris, he'll say something like, oh, yeah, by the way, I did this for 5 years, and I'm startled, and it's wonderful. So Chris is working on a book right now, and I don't know if I was supposed to say that, but I did anyway.
No, that's fine.
The point of this show is to disseminate the information and to share with people who might not have known about these things and hear about these things. And we are each amongst us people who have extraordinarily different backgrounds and yet the same purpose, which is to be able to work within energy and to make changes for ourselves and others, whether it's critical healing or working with demons or blood sorcery, it doesn't matter. It's an effort to take energy and be part of energy and be responsible in that work and to teach and move forward. So everybody take a round about how to reach you, and I'll go last. Victor?
On Facebook, Victor the Voice Furman.
And that's with an H. I have to say that.
That's with an H. F-U-H-R-M-A-N. That's correct.
And Victor, a little bit about what it is that you do?
Oh, I have no idea.
You don't know what you do, Victor?
What I consider myself as a child playing with energy and learning and growing. That's who I am.
There you go. Morgan?
Okay, you can reach me on Facebook, Morgan St. Knight, and you can also reach me through the website for my book. My book is Curse of Prometheus, A Tale of Medea, and the website is talesofmedea.com. I can be reached there.
Great, thank you. And Chris?
And you can find me at my email page, Hell's Rogue, HELSROGUE, at gmail.com, or you can find me on Hell's Rogue on my Facebook page.
Thank you all for being part of Dark Matters Radio with the Sorceress Cagliastro. I can be reached in a number of ways. You can go to my main website, which is CagliastroTheIronRing.com. You can find all of my books on Amazon under Cagliastro. Or you can find out a little bit about the studio and what's going to be happening there over a period of time at Cagliastro Studio in the Hands of Nine. I want to thank everyone who's on the air with me tonight, and I want to acknowledge the energy of my main attending, Demon 9, who has stepped in front of me a number of times in the last couple of weeks, keeping me safe, keeping me sane, keeping me clear. And I can also reach that sorceresscagliastro at gmail.com. I wanted to keep it as easy and simple as possible. This is the Dark Matters Radio Show, and if you have questions, if you have follow-ups, things you want to know, reach out to us. We are here to share the information with integrity. We're here to offer the information to anybody who wants to learn about it, and I